everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the web interview series that we have at Ball State Center for Professional Selling. Today, I'm thrilled to have a Ball State alum, as well as somebody who's had a lot of experience in sales in different big organizations like AT&T, Cisco, and now for Salesforce. It's an absolute pleasure to have Ms. Karen Mangia, who is the VP of Customer and Marketing Insights at Salesforce, who has a Ball State alum from 1999, who's from the CICS program, if I'm correct, from CICS, and she's had a lot of leadership positions. So thank you very much, Karen, for actually taking the time to talk to us and our audience.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So Karen, I think the reason, is it okay if I call you Karen?
Yes, absolutely.
So, Karen, one of the things which absolutely fascinated me was the fact that you said your title says Customer and Marketing Insights. So from that viewpoint, what is marketing and customer insights for you? Are you looking at it from a B2C perspective? Do you also do B2B? Or, hey, you have to do B2B and B2C?
Well, what's interesting about the Salesforce business is that as we continue to grow, we work in both of those models, the B2B market, the B2C market. And then we also see, especially from the point of view of our customers, that those are starting to blend. And sometimes you'll hear us talk about B2B2C because lots of companies are in the business of serving both sides of the market and needing to understand not only what's happening with the end customers who use our products, but also the people who sit in between us and our end customers.
So fantastic. So essentially, if then the way you look at customer insights for you is how can you help your B2B customers sell better to their customers? So consequently, you come up with tools and insights to help your B2B customers be successful in their business. Am I correct?
Well, so our thought process and core principle is we want to help our customers be successful with their customers. And so in order to do that, it's important for us to understand some things about the job role of the person that we're working with, right, and their priorities. It's important for us to understand and consider the geographies where they do business. What industry vertical that they're operating in and what's happening there. And then also, in addition to that, what size of business and what kind of growth trajectory are they on? Because we find all of those pieces of information give us clues about what success looks like with their customers and also about some of the goals that they might be pursuing and how we can best be of service in that journey.
Absolutely. Now, Karen, one of the things that I have found from my little bit of experience in working with some of these companies, especially when you talk to B2B companies, that most of them, they think they know what their customers want, but actually it's just kind of a wish that they knew what their customers wanted. So from your experience, when you deal with your sales force that goes out to sell to their B2B customers, to what extent is having insights about the customer critical in their ability to create value for themselves as well as for their customers?
What's so interesting is that you can be a very customer-centric organization and take great care of your customers without always knowing what they care about. Yeah. And the reason that I say that is if you're a frontline salesperson, and I've been in that role myself, you have some great knowledge and insights about the set of customers that you serve, right? And those tend to be a particular type of customer that were put together in a patch for you. And you get some great insights about what's happening with that set of customers. But no matter how much you know about them, it doesn't necessarily always translate up to big trends when you put together what you're hearing from all of your customers all over the world before you even start to add in prospects to the mix, people who you hope will be your customers. And so one of the things that happens when you're doing voice of the customer is so often it comes from the point of view of either the listener or the relationship owner or even the researcher.
Yeah.
So if you run surveys all day long, for example, you might be hearing from thousands of your customers or a big percentage of your customer base. And that gives you a set of insights about the trends overall of all of those customers all together. Whereas if you're that frontline sales or support person, you're getting a view of a specific type of customer that's operating in a specific manner. And those can be very different. And so I think the challenge that we see both for ourselves and both for the customers that we serve is how do you put together the best of what happens when people interact with customers with those transactions that they do and how they interface with you, with those trends that you're getting, in aggregate when you're doing things like focus groups and events and surveys.
Absolutely. No, Karen, you hit on so many things. I'm going to try to break it down into specific questions because I think it's fascinating you talk about this. The first thing you talked about is voice of customers, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the assumption that people have is like voice of customers in the previous days when they actually would go in, you would go with teams of 2 or 3, you would go to your B2B customer and then talk to different people in the customer's organization, right? The assumption still was, okay, you would observe what they do in their daily habitat and stuff like that. To what extent in your expertise has technology changed that where you can go beyond traditional ways of doing voice of customers to include things like what are the customers doing on social media? And can you give us a little bit more insight on that one too, please?
What I think technology has done is really change the game from how you want to engage as a company to get feedback from your customers to how customers want to engage with you to give you feedback. And so I think a couple of things happen in this very technology empowered age. First of all, customers feel empowered to let you know what they think about you and their experience on social media. And they expect you to do something meaningful with that information, especially if they're tagging you in it. The second piece is that means every single individual within a customer, not just the person who signs the contract or can buy add-on products and services, has the opportunity to shape the perception of your brand. And so for companies, that tends to be very daunting to manage because you could never afford to build a team of enough people to manage all the different channels in which your customers are choosing to provide you feedback. And yet an important part of building trust is about how you curate and respond to and take care with that information. And so I think technology creates that challenge that people believe they're giving you feedback and they expect to be heard and they expect to have action based on that feedback. And it creates a challenge, it creates a gap. And there's great opportunity where technology can help close the gap. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's about revisiting expectations and agreements that we all make with our customers.
Fascinating. No, this is very interesting because your ability as Salesforce to be successful with your customers, it hinges on the fact that your customers are ready, are equipped to deal with the fact that they should have the right tools to listen to their customers, correct? So to what extent do you actually even help your customers understand how they could use technology to listen and do a voice of customer without going through the expensive ways of trying to identify those customers and do these expensive customer site visits?
I think about it a little bit as a similar analogy to what you were talking about with technology. I mean, think about the CIO of today who's now trying to manage that people bring all kinds of devices to work, that they then connect to a company network that CIO or IT team might not have access to, they might not be supporting, but the person is using it in the context of getting work done for the company. Yeah. Right? So, people are equipped and everyone feels empowered to get their work done in what style they prefer. But at the end of the day, that poses some challenges for the company. And listening to customers is the same way. Everybody could technically go out and get a license or do a free survey of some sort that they could execute on their own and get information without necessarily needing to go through any kind of approval process. Exactly. And so when we step back and think about what it means to take the power of all these people with their individual insights and experiences and bring it together, we think about and talk about, how we enable together a customer 360 view. And you'll hear a number of companies talk about this, but it's the idea of how do you get a view and bring together using technology all the different things that you know about your customer, whether it's when their contract expires or how they use your product, through feedback that they've given you, their perceptions of you, and so forth. Yeah. And so just like in that CIO's world, the challenge is the proliferation of devices. The challenge for everyone listening to customers is the proliferation of data and data points and how to orchestrate that and put it into a hierarchy so that you can organize it and do something meaningful with it.
It's interesting you talk about the fact that CIOs, I remember reading, this was a couple of years ago, maybe it's outdated right now, and I read a report by one of the big 4 consulting firms, not the McKinseys, but I'm talking of the Deloittes, the Accentures and the other thing. And I read a report that talked about how the CIO's job is increasingly going to migrate into the CMO's job. And what are your thoughts on that? Because as you said, there's a lot of data coming up. So typically a CIO might expect to have a lot of data coming out because of either the infrastructure they put in place or the devices that they have. But ultimately, the intelligence comes and the CMO, the chief marketing officer, has got to use this. So what are your thoughts on that one?
We're seeing an increased amount of collaboration across the C-suite. And that ranges from whether you're talking about how many executives are involved in a technology buying decision today, for example, all the way through who's ultimately accountable for customer success. And one of the trends or initiatives that we see that really brings that C-suite together, but especially the CIO and the CMO, is all about digital transformation. You know, within that digital transformation world, it takes a partnership of technology infrastructure at scale and also knowing the market and the power of stories to really come together in a direction that engages your customers and the market, as well as your own employees in a meaningful way. And so those partnerships are becoming critical. And, you know, not every CIO exclusively owns the technology budget, and not every CMO exclusively owns the marketing budget any longer.
And that's very interesting. And you actually also see this fact that in the past, you would think of CIO as taking care of the architecture and everything else that's got to do with it, and the processes maybe, but then the outcome of it is owned by marketing. So do you actually see that that is happening much more, that they're actually getting together? I'm not talking not about small organizations, but I'm assuming the bigger ones where they see the importance of both of this. Yes, you need to have the architecture in place, especially with cybersecurity and everything else. But on the other hand, you also need to make sure that you make sense of all that information that you're gathering as well.
It does converge at the top, right? Where those executives come together. And one of the strategic dialogues we have on a regular basis are, what are a couple of metrics that are relevant now to help unite the C-suite around a common cause? Because if you talk about something like customer experience, for example, and you say, well, who owns the customer? Who's going to be accountable for that metric? Well, at the end of the day, now everybody in that executive suite owns the customer. So what's the shared customer experience metric of success? And what is each leader or each function's role in contributing toward the success or positively moving the needle on that metric?
Fantastic. Now, I'm going to go back to one of the things you mentioned earlier. You talked about transaction. Now, from the companies that I've worked with, the biggest thing for them in terms of preventing them from having a 360-degree view of the customer is what happens during the transactions. When I'm talking of transactions, I'm not necessarily talking just about the transaction when the customer pays or when the customer closes the deal, but I'm talking about what happens after a deal is made, where a lot of times when you go into any kind of sales training, that gets lost in the fact that a lot of the big deals with big projects, things start getting a little bit more difficult, not during the sales. I mean, if it is difficult during the sales process, the after sales, when you actually have to implement it, is where it starts getting a lot more difficult. And that's when you have a lot of transactional chatter or information or customers saying our voice of customer truly is there, right? So unfortunately, there is no 360-degree view, because in any organization, you could have different kind of interfaces or technology interfaces capturing each. So what would you recommend organizations to try and close that gap if they don't have one platform that has everything?
Well, there's a couple of points of view on how to address that. So to your point, implementation is the phase in which customers discover the difference between what they believe they purchased and what they actually did. There can often be a period of disillusionment there, just like if you've ever done a construction project. You know, you always laugh when they say it will take twice as much time and cost 30% more money. And so often when customers are in the implementation phase of a technology project, they sometimes feel that same way. And so there is a moment there when you have a great opportunity to provide incredible value to your customers by seeing them through that transition onto adoption. And where we most often see the implications of challenges in the implementation stage and the adoption stage show up is in conversations about business value. Because at some point along the way, a set of executives is going to come back and say, do you remember when we agreed we were going to spend lots of money to buy this technology that was going to deliver XYZ business value for us? Let's check in and see if that's really happening. And so we have an entire function of people at Salesforce who spend their time on that, which is revisiting the business case with the customer and reestablishing what does success look like. And very importantly, to your point, in what timeline can you capture that value?
Absolutely. And I'll get to that a little bit later on, because I want to talk to you a little bit more about what we call the revenue enablement model. So because the reason is, I've heard a lot about a 360-degree view of the customer. Every customer should have a single file. And that's actually a pipe dream. I've never come across an organization. Having said that, I'm sure that you have great examples of companies that have managed to do it, or not customers, but actually business units within customers. Because again, if you're dealing with a huge customer, I've had experiences where different business units have different, because of the legacy systems, each use different kind of technologies, and they have a different way of go to market, and it makes it that much more harder. So, but I think that's something that, in terms of making sure that you get the 360-degree view and get one file per customer, I think with technology now it's possible. But again, it's nice to hear that, yes, there are ways, but then you really have to have like a change management project to understand how it is. Going back, so you talked about voice of customer. So if I were to ask you right now, I'm putting you in the spot right now. If I were to ask you, what are some big trends that sales managers of B2B companies? I'm sure that there's a lot of wonderful things happening in B2C, and you and I can go back and forth what is truly a B2B or a B2C. But let's assume that almost all the companies that we are working with are B2B, and with some sort of B2B2C. Right? Mm-hmm. So what are some big trends that managers should be aware of based on some of your insights that you have seen?
First of all, that when sales teams and sales leaders partner with people who get feedback from customers in other ways, it's the best opportunity that you have to create new opportunities with customers, and also to begin mitigating risks before they become serious challenges. And so a great example of a partnership is when your teams who either do customer support or do customer research get signals that you have customers at risk, the further in advance of needing to renew a contract or make the next sale that you can get that information, as a sales leader, that's helpful. You want someone else to be the eyes and ears to say, hey, you need to take a pause and put a little attention here before this starts to escalate and we need the executive team swarming and we give away lots of discounts and the competition comes in and maybe we lose the customer. Yeah. So there's excellent partnership that happens there, early warning system. The second piece is we find that those partnerships are important between sales leaders and voice of customer teams, because almost all of the customers we serve have their own voice of customer teams. And when you can take your own team there to share best practices, you get to understand up close and personal how your customer is measuring success with their customers and how they're doing. And that's the basis of having value-based discussions. It's the basis of understanding how to help them disrupt. And I think the other piece too is being able to show up and add some value beyond the actual sale. Right. And then the last piece I would say is there's a lot of demands on sales leaders and sales people, especially in the B2B space, to understand industry verticals at a much deeper level. So in financial services or healthcare or education, the executives that you're dealing with in that B2B world expect you to know the environment that they're operating in and the context and what disruption is coming. And one of the great examples also of partnerships with a voice of customer team is they tend to be able to get that information for you at scale in a way that you can share some meaningful insights with your customers, connect them with other people like themselves, but also use that as the basis for innovation and how they can disrupt in their own industries. And every senior executive in a B2B company would love to have that information. And you provide a tremendous amount of value if you're the vendor or partner that can surface some of those opportunities for them.
And what you said is something that I've seen as a frustration for me as well, because sometimes when we would go into these corporate trainings, we would go in and sometimes we would be lucky if we had a bunch of marketing and sales people in the room. So let's say, for example, I would go into one company. But then sometimes I would go into a company where it's a whole training for a business unit. So there would be people in finance, there would be control, there would be production. And then despite our best intentions, and I asked them, what is the role of marketing? And the kind of things I've heard is marketing is a black hole. money goes in, nothing comes out. Marketing spends all the money that we work so hard to bring in. Why do you think there is still that kind of impression in people's head that marketing is a cost center, not creating value? Do you see that mindset changing amongst at least some of the customers you're dealing with? Or is that something still a challenge that you need to help your customers, the marketing folks that you're talking to, convince and sell within their own organization?
It's a challenge. And I think, some part of it is human nature, right? If you work in a restaurant, it's the chefs versus, the servers and the staff in the front of the house, right? If you're on the airplane, it's the pilot versus the cabin service crew, right? I mean, this plays out in a variety of industries in a variety of ways. And, the key to unlocking success in any business is collaboration.
Yeah.
One of the challenges we hear, or what people are looking for now in a digital age, is how do you measure success?
Yeah.
Of your marketing initiatives, right? Is it about leads generated? Is it about leads generated, pipeline closed? Is it about your classic metrics, in marketing, aided and unaided awareness and consideration, right? Are you moving the needle on those? Is it based on city? And so we see that some companies who do this incredibly well have the marketing leader and the sales leader on the same page and collaborating about what success looks like. Yeah. And when some of those agreements and that strategic planning happens up front, people get a little bit more out of the blame game and a little bit more into the execution game to make those metrics come to life and to get some results.
Indeed. Let me ask you this. This is again, I don't want to put you on the spot. To what extent do you think the fact that you were in sales before helps you be a better marketer? Because of the fact that you have been in the trenches yourself, you managed a team that has been in the trench, so you sort of know how marketing campaigns will land if it is done by people who have no excuse. So what, in your opinion, because I tell a lot of people saying that it's easier for you to go from sales into marketing rather than if you've been in marketing all along to go into sales. What are your thoughts on that?
One of the things that I found valuable, and it just happened as a case of fortunate timing, because I was working for AT&T as a project manager and there was a lot of organizational transition. It created an opportunity for me to go into sales very early in my career. And knowing what I know now, I have found spending a big chunk of my career directly in customer-facing roles has been an invaluable foundation, because from my point of view, it all starts and ends with the customer. We can make a fantastic product, but if a customer isn't going to buy it, then in and of itself, that product isn't valuable for us now, right? Or if we're going to measure what success looks like with our customers, we need to measure something that the customer would say they care about, not what we care about. And so I find having the context of, first of all, the pressure to perform that salespeople and sales leaders are under every single day. It's important to have that context and to empathize with, they can only take on so many new trainings and campaigns and products before you're taking time away from them being with customers. So I find it creates great empathy and also the ability to understand more and think in terms of truly outside in. How does it start with the customer and feed into the organization as opposed to the opposite? How does it start with what we want and then we slowly push that out to the customer?
And how do you make sure that now that you're in marketing, or at least in the marketing side of things, how do you make sure that you're constant? Because the fact is that your idea of sales was when you were in sales. And there's been so much change right now. How do you ensure that you could be in marketing, but you're still in touch with what's happening, what's the pulse, what's happening in sales? How do you ensure you do it for yourself and your team?
Because we still spend time with sales leaders and we still spend time directly with customers. So, even though we do things like surveys and focus groups, which tend to be more classic market research techniques, as a company, we continue to prioritize having a number of ways that people can be out directly interfacing with customers. And those experiences help keep you current on what matters to customers now. So we purposely prioritize some of our time to keep that customer interface alive and strong and continue to sustain relationships with customers, because it is so critical to having a point of view and being able to do integrated and representative marketing.
Fantastic. I mean, that's pretty much what we tell our students, but it's nice to hear that that's also practiced in a very well-reputed company as well. Now, one of the things that we hear a lot, Karen, is the fact that when we talk about customer insights, now I'm going to go in and I'm going to get into it. So one of the things which really got me interested some time back was this finding by in the Challenger sale, the book The Challenger Sale, that said 57% of a buying decision is made before they talk to a sales rep. And that set me off on a path where I actually had a doctoral student go and talk to people in procurement to see if that's really true. And of course, what we found out was that statement is just meant to shock. The different industries have different levels of that. So what are your thoughts on that one? Is that, I'm sure that Salesforce has its own numbers for it. So 57% is not a Salesforce number. But do you see that happening a lot as well, that customers are doing a lot more decisions without the help of salespeople?
I would take it beyond the making decisions. I would actually frame it differently. It would be forming perceptions. Yeah. And some of the very early on perceptions are, do I even need to purchase something or not? And very oftentimes sales teams are not present and influencing in that discussion because a decision might have been made about no before we're ever sitting at the table to even entertain the dialogue or try to create some influence. Yeah. I think the other big factor is, in an increasingly networked world, it's not so much about the context of people going online and looking up your products and your competitors' products, though certainly people do that and have that information at their fingertips. It's that it's much easier for customers to connect with other customers to get a perception of what it's really like to work with you and with your brand. And because that ability to network with people is so strong and so automated, perceptions about your brand and your positioning and your value are set in a lot of ways through social context and peer context. And those are the influential discussions, especially with decision makers, where salespeople aren't always present.
I love what you said. To be honest, that's one of the things which is where I have my opinions, very strong opinions of the 57%. But I love the fact that you say, what I usually tell my students is that if they've made the decision, they think they know what they want. It is the equivalent of you saying the perceptions of what they think they want based on a multitude of factors that goes beyond just doing their homework online. And I love the fact you said something which is, especially if they're doing a lot of information, the branding of a firm becomes extremely critical, because people usually think that branding is very critical in B2C, but I cannot stress enough how important branding is in a B2B space, because if the size of the order is going to be big and the project is going to be huge, then they want to make sure that risk mitigation and brand is a good source of risk mitigation. And my question to you actually is, this is kind of linked to it, is that we talk a lot about now LinkedIn has these numbers like the social selling index, right? So the idea is that, okay, I'm going to be talking to a sales rep right now, I'm going to have a social selling index and these kind of numbers. To what extent do you think then, I mostly link the social selling index to kind of your personal branding. To what extent do you think that even for skeptical salespeople, and I mean skeptical, I'm not talking in terms of chronologically older salespeople, but again, there are skeptics who say, I don't need to have a social presence, or I don't need to be doing that. What is your advice, or what are your thoughts on that? The fact that social selling, is it important even today?
I would come back to the point that we were just talking about, which is just in the same way that if I asked you, hey, I know you're using Salesforce, what do you think? And what you say, if you and I have a relationship, is more influential than anything a salesperson can show up and say. I think the same thing is true with salespeople. You can be posting fantastic thought leadership articles on Twitter and, connecting with decision makers from your customer on LinkedIn and sharing articles and connecting them. At the end of the day, you're just as well served or even better served to have some relationships with other executives like them who could make the call for you and say, you know what, it's worth taking a meeting with such and such a person. I found them to be incredibly valuable. Indeed. So I think it's all about where you put your effort in building your brand. And if you put it in building great relationships with your customers so that they're willing to call and open the door for you with others, you're just as well served as, being a Twitter machine.
Thank you. Because essentially what you're saying is that social selling need not be because of social media, but it's because of the social relationships that you build. And that could be as much as face-to-face that you can do. But the key thing is, will somebody pick up the phone and call on your behalf and say, this is a person, and you can do it perfectly even without a good LinkedIn profile. Because for me, that's what at least we try to tell our students, it's not all about technology. We were building relationships before technology. Yes, sure. If you can also do it on that medium, that's fantastic. Great. So this is really, really interesting. So good. So 57%. The next question I actually have is this concept of, okay, you had that fact that a lot of companies sort of went overboard saying, okay, 57% of a buying decision is made. There's another metric that says 77% of B2B buyers prefer to do their homework online on Google. They want to personalize this. And we saw a lot of companies then go and say, we're going to spend a lot of money in marketing. And essentially without necessarily having a very clear idea about how to measure the success of marketing. Right? And that's what you talked about earlier as well. To what extent do you think that when we have this concept of the customers are doing their homework online, to what extent should I be careful about those kind of numbers and see, should I go in terms of investing in new kinds of marketing kind of things without a very clear idea about how the marketing process works? So what are your thoughts on that? What should I be looking for when everybody's telling me you should be investing in marketing?
Right. So clear priorities come from a clear sense of purpose. So you need to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish as a business. What is the metric that you are trying to move? Then it's, will marketing move that metric? And if so, how much investment of both time and money will it take to get there? And so it is tempting. I use the example of these little tasty videos or these things online, right? Where you watch someone with the camera up here and, you know, they're cooking something and it takes like 1 minute. Well, most research will tell you people never go make the thing that's in that video, right? They just watch it. But it is kind of fun. So then you think maybe we need a video like that. I mean, it's like 1 minute and it's fun. But at the end of the day, what's the metric that's moving you there? And, you know, how is that ultimately contributing to, you know, better relationships with your customers, higher likelihood to recommend, increased loyalty, add-on sales? And if you don't know the metric you're trying to target, having a method to do it is a little bit in reverse.
Indeed. And to what extent do you think that companies which went overboard when you had these numbers coming up, are they now realizing this? Are they backtracking and saying, wait a minute, let's have a very clear marketing process with a very clear metric, and let's again start small? Do you see that happening as well?
We see the conversations framed in terms of digital, right? Because digital seems to have this implication of, well, we'll just sort of like put everything online, or we'll have a bigger social media presence. And that's really not what building a digitization strategy means in this day and age. And so what happens is words get used and those phrases get used, but without a plan that's aligned to your organization with the right executive sponsorship, those words don't mean anything. They don't lead to a business result. So what happens is people get into it and it's like, well, digital must not be the path for us. I know other people are doing it. Yeah. But it's not getting results for us. And, you know, again, it's stepping back with who are your customers now? What are their needs? How are you trying to disrupt your competitors and your vertical to add more value to your customers? And then what are the techniques that go with that? And so jumping to, you know, a story or an initiative, while it can be tempting because it tends to move quicker when you just pick a solution and start executing it, doesn't often lead to the desired results or the ability to measure any results from that.
Fantastic. But this is great. Essentially what I'm hearing you say is what we learned a long time ago in Salesforce automation and how you have to implement it, was you're not going to let technology dictate everything. You need to ask yourself first and foremost is, what is the sales process going to look like? What should be automated? What should be a good indication of what we want to achieve with it? So what we're talking about is actually even marketing, which people think is a very creative form, but actually is a step of processes with outcomes that will tell you whether you're doing the right things. And which is what is, I think, to a lot of kids, I mean, think of younger people who think of marketing as all the creative stuff. Sure, it's in there, but you also need to have a very, very structured process in place, because otherwise somebody's going to come back and ask you, for all the money that I put in, what are the results that you're giving me? So is my take right on understanding and linking it back to what we had in Salesforce before? Salesforce automation, sorry.
Right. Well, with marketing, it's all about moving your customers along a journey, right? And you have to define the points in the continuum and what those incremental progress points look like so that you understand if you've achieved that one before you move to the next one. And we find that companies who are the most successful move through those journeys by breaking their customers down into a series of segments of some sort and revisiting that regularly to make sure that you're targeting the right people with the right engagement opportunity at the right time.
And is that something that from your experience? Is it something that the people who sell the marketing automation software for Salesforce, right? Especially look at, is that something that they take the customers on their journey before a customer could just come in and say, I want this, but you say, wait a minute, let's take a step back. Let's understand what your needs are. Is it concrete? And then help them through the process?
Well, yes, because, in that instance, it's also about understanding whether or not an organization is in a position to implement and execute on it, right? So you don't always take people who've been successful in traditional marketing roles in the past and then just flip a switch and suddenly they can execute in a completely different way. Yeah. It's like any role. You can be excellent at what you do, but if we ask you to move to a fundamentally different part of the portfolio without any training, we're not setting you up to be very successful. Yeah. And this is the same way. It's a different set of skills. It's a different cadence of activity with a different set of metrics of success. And so a piece of it is really understanding what's the goal and then also some organizational readiness. So yes, certainly our teams spend a lot of time talking with customers about that because it's really critical to their success.
Indeed. This is great. So now this is interesting. So the next step, usually when we talk about this, right? So essentially we have insights about the customers. And then the next thing would be, listen, I have these insights. Now I want to provide it. So let's say, for example, your team collects that insights about customers. And let's say you go to do it by vertical, by situation, because a vertical does not tell you everything. You could have different verticals and you could have situations where they're unique situations that are common across many different verticals. Now, one of the things we also see is, especially I had to give a couple of talks about sales enablement. It's essentially that information that you gain and you want to start providing it. And there's a lot of literature that says that, marketing comes up with these great insights and stuff like that. And then salespeople still go out and reinvent the wheel. They go out there. To what extent do you think that is something that you see with some of your customers where marketing could come up with great collaterals? It could be your case as well. You come up with great collateral to help your customers, but salespeople end up using only 10 to 20% of it. And these are just statistics I'm quoting. So is that something that you find within Salesforce that is frustrating, or you have done something right to make sure that a lot of the message that you want to bring is translated by the salespeople, ensuring that the customer, irrespective of the channel, they get the same message?
Relationships matter. And so I'll go back to an earlier point in our discussion, which is any function inside of a company that operates in a silo creates and sustains that challenge. And connecting to sales is critically important and also challenging because lots of people, want to get the attention of sales teams because, of course, they're the revenue generating and growth machines of any company. And so the challenge there is how often salespeople really don't know marketers and marketers really don't know salespeople. And so what ends up happening, and the implication of that is people don't always know how to find each other. And I'll use some examples from my past. When I was a sales leader, I would listen to customers or our channel partners share a concern about something, and I would listen. And I've worked in very large companies. I had no idea how to find the person or people inside of my company who may have heard of this problem and in addition may be working on solving it. And then in the flip side, when I was working in, starting in my voice of customer type of career and working with people on a day-to-day basis who had never carried quotas and never seen customers, I was amazed that they had never spoken to a salesperson and were creating something for a salesperson, or they had never spoken to a customer and were creating something for a customer. And so I think one of the big challenges, and there's no single way to solve for it, and I think the culture of your company matters in how you solve for it, but it's how do you connect people to share timely, relevant information in a way that is not so cumbersome and time-consuming that both sides quit before they get to the goodness of the payoff?
Absolutely.
And that's the challenge. It's not because the company's not aware of the problem and they're not solving it. It's how do you get the information from people who are solving problems to people who can communicate that to the customers who care about it?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I've heard many companies struggle with. The fact is that, for example, companies that use chatter to get that. So the idea is that the marketing people with the sales team, I'm not talking of within Salesforce, I'm talking of customers of Salesforce who happen to have that, and they still struggle with getting people to use either chatter. So they might end up having chatter, they still end up purchasing Slack. Mm-hmm. So essentially to do the same thing that they could have maybe done it with chatter. So essentially they start using Slack. And you see this happening, and I think what you're saying makes absolute sense. And that's pretty much what we usually say. So from the viewpoint, from a marketing perspective, so from what I hear you say is that you also have an internal customer, that's your sales force. That is to convince them, to tell them that, hey, listen, we know what we are talking about. we stand behind that information that we've actually collected based on your interactions with your customers and other similar salespeople, and we know what we're talking about. So I think it's very, very interesting. And from your point of view, so how do you measure the success of your messaging with your sales force? You see what I mean? It's easy to start talking in terms of saying, okay, with my customers it works, with the number of leads generated and stuff like that. But when you go into sales enablement, right? How do you measure that success? How do you measure the success of sales enablement?
It's challenging, and lots of companies try to measure it in lots of different ways, right? I mean, it can be about pipeline growth. It can be about selling across the portfolio, tends to be a classic one, right? We sell the thing that we know or that was core to the company in its beginnings. And now what we need is, selling across the portfolio creates greater stickiness with the customer, greater loyalty, better for everyone. So some people measure it with that. Some companies do it tied to attrition. Some do it about the number of overlays that you need to have in addition to your sales force, who are these product specialists that can talk about your products. There's so many different ways to measure it. It's just very contextual to what matters in your organization. Are you a growth company? Are you trying to drive costs out of your sales model? Is your portfolio changing? Are you in high acquisition mode? So much is within context of what's happening in that business as to what the success of enabling your sales organization really looks like.
This is a fantastic answer, because for me, what sometimes is very confusing is you're on LinkedIn and you see people you're connected to post tons of stuff, and they don't make that nuance saying that, okay, this is what works in these conditions. And so essentially they make it claim that it's going to be a cure all for everything. And I think that is a disservice to a lot of people, because essentially people are going to fall for that and realize that what works for one company need not always work for them. You need to actually prepare. And this is exactly the kind of things that hopefully some of the students that we train take away, the fact that what works for one company might not work for the other. So going with these kind of numbers is nice to get your curiosity, but then you have to educate the people about when it works, when it does not work, when should you be careful about these kind of numbers as well. That brings me to the following. So essentially the idea is that, okay, you talked a little bit about how to generate leads to a certain extent, how to do that, and you talked about enabling my sales force, which for me, the next one, which is very, very interesting, and we are actually doing a lot of research projects right now, which is the concept of customer success. Right. And recently I was in a conference called Pulse, which is by a company called Gainsight, and then we had to give a small talk there. But the concept of customer success, now how critical is it? Because I remember the first time I saw the term customer success, I was there in an audience, I thought, there you go, another fancy word for key account manager. But then the more I got into it, I realized that, hey, there are some customers where you cannot afford to have a key account manager, and the role of a customer success manager could be quite different. So what are your thoughts on what is the role of a customer success manager, and how are they going to be critical in kind of recurring revenue models going forward?
Customer success managers are absolutely critical for helping customers get through that post-implementation and adoption phase, right? They step in at the point in time when customers tend to be the most disillusioned and help customers find a path forward to value. So they're vitally important in terms of their ability to have plays that help your customers adopt or use or get value from what they've purchased. They're critical for doing add-on sales, customer health checks, and at the end of the day, for retaining and renewing customers. Yeah. So it's an absolutely critical role that's, part relationship, part sales. And what happens is, we think about this model of land and expand selling, right? You land an initial deal, right? And that happens with a pre-sales team, right? Then you go through implementation either on your own or with some kind of partner. Then you end up in this post-sales world, and that's where we're looking for. You add more licenses, right? You add on additional products, and the customer success managers are the people who are the gateway to that revenue, to getting the expansion, not just landing a new logo or landing a new opportunity.
It's fantastic, because I was recently talking to the CEO of an Indianapolis-based startup called Bolstra. And essentially I was talking to the CEO, and he was talking about the land and expand, and he said something which I thought was very interesting, because landing does not stop at a salesperson closing the deal. According to him, landing starts at the point where you deliver on the value that was promised in the sales call. For him, that is the point of landing, and it's very, very interesting because I come from a sales perspective where my landing stops at I've landed the customer, but from a customer success, the way he defined it. And that's very interesting because it can be a challenge, because if a salesperson is no longer involved, if there's a handover done,
yes,
then it's very interesting, because most companies take a look at margins from salespeople. That's actually the difference between the list price and what price they got. But actually, if they made a false promise, you may end up, the true margin is how much it's going to cost you to fulfill the needs of the customers. So essentially, I think we need to take a look at metrics again in terms of what do we mean by true margins and sales calls, because if this is the idea of land and expand, then essentially what we're talking about is a lot of the responsibility then falls on the customer success or the post-implementation team, and they might have to pay for some of the extravagances, for lack of a better word, that salespeople might have done in convincing the customer to sign the deal. Do you sort of also have the same mindset, saying landing truly happens when you deliver that first value that you promised?
It makes me think of that older saying that you make your money on a house when you buy it.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit the same way in this kind of world. You find out in the post-sales, customer support, customer success world, how well you did at securing a customer that you can afford to support. Because, when we play Let's Make a Deal and, bring customers on board that require a lot of customization, a lot of support, to your point, the profit in that evaporates very quickly. And we find out that in a way, maybe we didn't make our best money when we were buying that house, and it catches up with you later. Yeah. In terms of, support costs, challenges, customer frustration, customer attrition, and so forth. And so, understanding the landscape that your customers are operating in and how well you can deliver on what they need, within the framework of your existing services is really critical. Mm. And when I say that, I also realize I've been a salesperson and a sales leader and been frustrated that someone wanted to tell me no, and I'm like, I'm going to sell it anyway. And you know why? Because I wasn't the customer success manager supporting the customer. So, right, wrong, or indifferent, having lived on both sides of it, I can appreciate how we get there. I think the challenge is, how do we do a better job of matching, what a customer needs with what we can all realistically deliver and profitably deliver.
Indeed. And do you foresee, because when we think of 360-degree view of the customer, again, this is me limited. I think of, there's a marketing side, there's a sales side, and there's a customer service side. Do you think that 360-degree view now also has to be shared with the customer success side?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Yes, they need to be a piece of it, both contributing information and utilizing.
Exactly, indeed. And to what extent do you actually now, because when based on as a marketing and customer insights leader, to what extent now do you also have people from customer success who contribute to an indirect voice of the customer, because they're the ones who are telling you the problems and things that you come up? Do you actually have them reporting, or at least having periodic meetings with them to give you insights as well?
Yes, absolutely. That's a critical set of relationships for us and for many of our customers, because this is the group that gets a lot of intelligence about how your customers are feeling after the implementation, how they're progressing over time, where they get stuck, what we might be able to automate, right, to make some aspect of their experiences better. And then also at the end of the day, this tends to be the group that is measuring some important things like customer effort scores. So, what's the time and effort your customers are having to invest relative to what they expect to get to a particular outcome? And that's an invaluable set of information. So yes, we're very disciplined about connecting those insights with the rest of what we hear. And I know that's critical to lots of our customers as well for the same reason.
And since you are the single point of contact in terms of insights, because you get information from everywhere, to how periodically do you share, let's say, for example, insights of these were the key insights we got from talking to customer success managers. So you want to shoot it out as a blast to your sales leaders and your marketing. You see what I mean? To what extent do you have these kind of, whether we like it or not, we work in silos. We might do everything to cross silos and they work well, but how do you make sure that the key things that you learn from each are periodically shared with the others as well, with the other silos?
It's all about knowing the context of what your stakeholder needs and when they need it. So for example, when we're working with senior leaders in the business, as senior leaders are thinking about setting priorities and strategies for a new fiscal year, they tend to have different degrees of needs about the insights they want about the market and our customers and our prospects, because it helps set the priorities for what products we build and bring to market and in what order, how we potentially change our go-to-market models, how we adjust our sales enablement strategies. So that's an example of knowing that that audience doesn't want a continuous drip of information every single day, but there are a couple of critical planning milestones along the way in a year that matter. We engage with them, as that matters. Absolutely. With people in the organization where we're looking at, they want to be able to keep a pulse on what we're hearing. We do at Salesforce use our own product chatter. And there's a group called Research Central that you can track along with, what we're hearing. And it's based on, topics or specific engagements when things happen. So, you can sort of consume that as you want or don't, but then you can always go back and search it if you feel like something's relevant later. Or maybe you're going to meet with a customer and you're looking for some kind of data point. It's, easily searchable and you can access it there. But I would say the strategy is very tuned by audience and knowing what people need to know and when they need to know it. Otherwise, we become noise also.
Got it. So the cadence is then, there's no preset cadence. It's decided based on certain events or certain things coming up or escalation of something happening, so that we say, okay, now this is critical for us to make sure we need to bring this across to people as well. And do you also combine at that point in time, do you combine your chatter, which is more inside chatter, with social listening, and then try to combine them together to say, hey, listen, you guys were talking about some issues with customers. The customer voiced their frustration on Twitter, on things like that, and you combine them together to say why this is critical? Is that something that you do as well?
We think about it in terms of not having any customer feedback vehicle be a single load-bearing wall, right? So I think it's very tempting, and I see this with lots of companies that I work with and partner with on a regular basis, which is it's tempting to take a single instance of listening, whether that's an executive advisory board or your annual relationship survey, and say, this is the voice of our customers and what they need. And so we try to think about architecting these in terms of getting context from other places. So if we hear themes at a customer advisory board with CIOs, we'll go and look at feedback that people are giving us in the idea exchange about what products they want us to build next or features that they want adjusted, because those are the hands-on people using and developing with the products every day versus strategically. Yeah. So social listening provides context at moments in time, because what we're looking for is the message or the signal that we're hearing specific to the audience we're listening to or topic that we're listening for? Or is this a consistent theme that no matter whether we're talking to big companies or small ones or execs or individual contributors, we're getting a drumbeat of a particular topic that's sustained?
Fantastic. 2 more questions for you, Karan. I know your time is very busy. AI. Now, almost everybody keeps talking about AI, and we see all these cool presentations from Salesforce about your AI. Can you give us some insights on how you're using AI in your department? I know that Salesforce is doing a lot of cool things, but how do you use AI in your department?
Right. One great example of how our research teams use it is to do key driver analysis. Right. So when you do a survey and you're looking at a top line metric like net promoter score or customer satisfaction, it's important to know, for example, the top 10 things that drive that overall perception. Right. So the analogy I always use is a net promoter score is like being with your spouse or significant other. And once a year you sit down, it's your anniversary and you celebrate and you say, are we going to break up or stay together for another year? And then at the end of the day, the reason you answer that question one way or the other is because there's lots of underlying factors that contribute to that. Absolutely. They're very good about using Einstein as an example to calculate that. And also to scan through comments for sentiment analysis. Yeah. So there's many use cases, but absolutely AI, critical to the future, critical to automation and scale and insights.
Fantastic. So I'm sure that we can talk for hours about this, because I think there are some ways by which AI can really help the sales process as well, but there are ways by which you should be careful. And I want to take your time. The last question I have is actually for something which you actually have written a book on, which is actually the fact that technology, all of this is great. You can do all this, but it also takes a toll on you as an individual as well. So in your opinion, how should, if we're talking about some of the younger audiences who might be watching this, what would your advice be in terms of, how would you help use technology? How would you use it to help you? But at the same time, what should you be careful about? What should you be watchful for?
One of the biggest lessons that I learned was I tried to replicate the formula that I saw for success of people operating around me who were doing well. Yeah. And what I believed that I observed, especially as I was going up through my sales and sales leadership career, was it seemed like people always said yes. Yeah. They delivered results and made it look easy and effortless. And so it cemented in my thought process that you should always do yes and take on more, and then you'll sort of be rewarded with more, and then the cycle continues. And I hit a crossroads in my own life and in my own health and well-being where I could no longer do more. Uh-huh. And so it really challenged everything I knew about how to be successful, in the context of my career and in my life. So I shared the story in Success with Less of, I literally hit a point where the only thing I could do was less. And so how do you learn to reinvent? And I think one of the great aspects of technology is it makes it easier than ever before, especially as a sales professional or as a customer researcher, to get information and to automate some aspects of what you do on a day-to-day basis that would have been manual before. So it can bring you information that helps you have better meetings and connect you to thought leaders more easily. The flip side is it challenges your boundaries more. Indeed. Because it cements this belief that you should always be on, and that busy is this badge of success and will ultimately get you to your number or your deliverable or your goal. Yeah. And I found as I sort of stepped back and looked through the years of my career at leaders who I really admired, and I was amazed at the number of senior executives that came to mind who were people that always made you feel like they had time for you, and who I later discovered would have these like 2 or 3 hours of think time blocked on their calendar. And I thought, how do you have time to do this? You're so busy. And what they knew that I didn't was, you have to learn to pause, then use that time to really ponder what's going on around you, give yourself some processing time, and then prioritize what you're going to do next. That you can never offload your calendar or reprioritize, if you don't take that pause time. I just happened to get to that insight a really hard way. And that's kind of the story that I tell in the book.
But I think at some point in time, we should definitely have a conversation about that part, because I really think that we need to manage the limited time that we have in life today. And that's more philosophical and that kind of stuff, that how do we need to manage this? And technology can help you a lot, but you can easily get sucked into it as well. And how you want to say yes to all the customers that you want. You want to answer every customer. You want to answer your boss, and you want to do it as soon as possible in the evenings, taking time away from whatever are your pursuits, whatever keeps you happy, be it family, be it your own activities, me time kind of stuff, as you said. I think that should be something that we should definitely talk about in a future topic. But at this point, I really want to really thank you for your time, Karen, and essentially, what you shared is very, very interesting. And I hope that my audience will actually have a chance to listen to what you had to say, what your thoughts on this are. And I just want to say, any last words that you would like to say?
Thank you so much. And I think an important part of the journey for all of us is continuing to learn from each other. So I'll look forward to hearing back from your audience of listeners what tips and tricks they have and insights and additional questions, because I have the opportunity to learn from all of you as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Karen, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much. You too.